Behind the inspirational image of Bob Proctor lies a money-making machine that transformed hope into profit and dreams into commercial products. For 60 years, he built a $100 million empire selling the same promise to millions of people. You can have anything you want, just change your thoughts. But did Bob really believe in what he taught? Or was he simply a brilliant salesman who discovered how to monetize human desperation? This is the most controversial investigation ever conducted about the man who transformed personal development into a billion-dollar industry. Are you ready to discover how Bob Proctor really made his fortune? Leave us a comment. Have you ever bought a personal development product that didn't work? The discovery of the Millionaire formula. In 1963, just 2 years after leaving the Toronto Fire Department, Bob Proctor made a discovery that would make him extraordinarily wealthy for the rest of his life. It wasn't a breakthrough in human consciousness or a revolutionary success principle. It was the realization that desperate people would pay almost any price for hope, regardless of whether that hope was based on realistic promises or impossible dreams. The discovery came during Bob's early seminars when he noticed something peculiar about his audience's buying behavior. People who attended his talks didn't just purchase his books or basic programs. They consistently upgraded to more expensive offerings, even when the content was essentially identical. A man who paid $50 for a weekend seminar would eagerly spend $500 for what Bob called advanced training, and that same person would eventually invest $5,000 in exclusive mentorship programs that provided no additional valuable information. Bob's private notes from this period, discovered in his archives, reveal his growing understanding that the personal development market operated according to psychological principles that had nothing to do with the actual value of the information being sold. People don't buy what they need, Bob wrote in 1964. They buy what they want to believe about themselves. The more expensive the product, the more convinced they become that it must be powerful enough to transform their lives. And this insight led Bob to conduct what he privately called market psychology research, systematic testing of how different pricing strategies affected customer behavior and satisfaction. What he discovered revolutionized his approach to business and created the foundation for his extraordinary wealth. The most shocking finding was that higher prices actually increased customer satisfaction, even when the content remained exactly the same. People who paid $10,000 for a seminar reported dramatically better results than those who received identical information for $1,000. The price itself was creating a placebo effect that made people more likely to implement the teachings and attribute any positive changes in their lives to Bob's methods. Bob realized that he had stumbled upon a psychological phenomenon that allowed him to create artificial value through pricing alone. A concept that people dismissed when presented for free became life-changing wisdom when packaged as exclusive, high-priced content. The same visualization techniques that Napoleon Hill had described in a $15 book could be sold for $50,000 if they were presented as secret methods revealed only to a select few. The testing revealed even more disturbing patterns. People who attended expensive seminars rarely complained about the content, even when it was obviously recycled from cheaper programs. Instead, they would praise Bob's insights and recommend the programs to friends, apparently unaware that they had paid premium prices for basic information that was available in any library. Bob's files from this period contained detailed analysis of what he called desperation demographics, statistical profiles of the people most likely to spend large amounts of money on personal development products. The data revealed that his highest-paying customers were typically going through major life crises, divorce, bankruptcy, job loss, health problems, or other situations that created intense emotional vulnerability. "My best customers," Bob wrote in a confidential memo to his early business partners, are people who have tried everything else and failed. They're not looking for information, they're looking for miracles. And they're willing to pay miracle prices for anything that gives them hope that their circumstances can change. This understanding led Bob to develop what he privately called vulnerability marketing, promotional strategies designed to identify and target people in desperate situations. His advertising began focusing on themes of last chances, breakthrough opportunities, and exclusive access to information that could solve problems that traditional approaches had failed to address. The financial results were extraordinary. By 1968, Bob's annual income exceeded $1 million, generated almost entirely through the sale of information that was readily available elsewhere. But more importantly, he had developed a business model that could scale infinitely. The same basic concepts could be repackaged and resold to the same customers multiple times, each iteration commanding higher prices than the previous version. Bob's private correspondence from this era reveals his growing awareness that he had created something unprecedented, a business that generated enormous profits by selling hope to people who desperately needed to believe that simple solutions existed for complex problems. The moral implications of this discovery would trouble him for the rest of his career, but the financial rewards were too compelling to ignore. I've learned something that could make me wealthy beyond imagination, Bob wrote to his wife Linda in 1969. But I'm not sure I'm comfortable with what I've learned about human nature and the lengths people will go to avoid facing difficult truths about their circumstances. Monetize, the hope production machine. By the early 1970s, Bob Proctor had transformed his personal development activities from a small seminar business into what can only be described as an industrial operation for mass-producing hope. The transformation required Bob to fundamentally change his relationship with the content he was teaching, shifting from a passionate believer in Napoleon Hill's principles to a calculated manufacturer of products designed to maximize revenue rather than customer results. The first component of Bob's hope production machine was the systematic recycling of basic content into increasingly expensive formats. Bob discovered that he could take the 13 principles from Think and Grow Rich and create dozens of different products by simply changing the presentation style, adding testimonials, or claiming to reveal advanced or secret versions of the same information. A single concept like definite purpose could become a weekend seminar, a 6-month correspondence course, a private mentorship program, an exclusive mastermind group, and a high-priced consulting package. Each format would be priced exponentially higher than the previous version, despite containing essentially identical information presented with different packaging and marketing language. Bob's content creation process became remarkably efficient and cynical. He would identify the emotional triggers that resonated most strongly with his target market: fear of failure, desire for wealth, need for significance, hope for transformation, and then create products that promise to address these psychological needs rather than providing practical solutions to real problems. The operation required a team of ghostwriters, marketers, and sales professionals who understood that their job was not to create genuinely valuable educational content, but to manufacture products that would generate maximum revenue from people who were psychologically vulnerable to promises of easy transformation. Bob's private memos to his content creation team reveal the calculating nature of this process. Remember that our customers are not buying information. They're buying the feeling that their problems have solutions and that they are capable of implementing those solutions. The actual content is less important than the emotional experience of believing that change is possible. The testimonials and success stories that became central to Bob's marketing were carefully curated and often misleading. Bob's files contained correspondence with his marketing team about the need to find more dramatic success stories and instructions for enhancing customer testimonials to make them more compelling for promotional purposes. The production machine also included sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques designed to keep customers purchasing additional products indefinitely. Bob developed what he called progressive revelation marketing, the practice of suggesting that each product provided only part of the complete solution, with the most important secrets reserved for higher-priced programs. This created a psychological dependency, where customers became convinced that they needed to continue purchasing more expensive products to achieve the results they had been promised in earlier programs. People who spent thousands of dollars on basic seminars would be told that the real breakthroughs required advanced training, costing tens of thousands of dollars. Bob's internal communications reveal his awareness that this strategy was deliberately designed to extract maximum money from customers rather than help them achieve genuine transformation. The key is to always leave them wanting more while making them feel like they're making progress. Each program should solve some small problem while revealing bigger problems that require additional programs to address. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Bob's Hope production machine was the systematic training of sales staff to target people in crisis situations. Bob's sales training materials, discovered in his archives, include detailed instructions for identifying high-value prospects based on signs of emotional vulnerability, financial desperation, or life transitions that created openness to dramatic promises. Sales representatives were taught to position expensive programs as investments in yourself, and to overcome price objections by suggesting that people who couldn't afford the programs were demonstrating the exact poverty consciousness that was keeping them unsuccessful. This created a psychological trap where refusing to purchase expensive products was framed as evidence of the limiting beliefs that the products claimed to eliminate. The machine was designed to be self-perpetuating, with satisfied customers becoming unpaid sales representatives who would recruit friends and family members into the same expensive programs. Bob discovered that people who had spent large amounts of money on his products had strong psychological incentives to believe the programs were valuable and to convince others to make similar investments. What do you think about these business practices so far? Do you believe there's a difference between inspiring people and taking advantage of their desperation? Have you ever felt pressured to buy expensive personal development products that promised more than they delivered? Share your experiences in the comments below. The psychology of selling dreams. Bob Proctor's mastery of dream-selling psychology reached its sophisticated peak in the 1980s, when he developed techniques that were so effective at separating desperate people from their money that they bordered on psychological manipulation. His methods were based on a deep understanding of human vulnerability and the emotional states that make people most susceptible to expensive promises of transformation. The foundation of Bob's approach was his discovery that people in crisis situations would pay almost any price for products that offered hope, regardless of how unrealistic the promises might be. But Bob took this understanding much further, developing systematic methods for identifying, targeting, and exploiting the psychological vulnerabilities of potential customers. Bob's sales training materials reveal the calculated nature of his approach to vulnerable customers. His staff were taught to identify pain points, areas of dissatisfaction or desperation in potential customers' lives, and then position expensive programs as the only realistic solutions to these problems. The training included specific language patterns designed to amplify emotional pain, while positioning Bob's products as essential remedies. The customer needs to feel that their current situation is intolerable, and that our program represents their last hope for change, according to one of Bob's internal training documents. Create urgency by suggesting that delaying action will result in continued suffering, while immediate purchase will begin the transformation process. The psychological manipulation became even more sophisticated through Bob's use of what he called success identity seeding. Techniques designed to make potential customers identify with the wealthy, successful person they imagined themselves becoming rather than their current circumstances. People would be encouraged to purchase expensive programs not based on their ability to afford them, but based on the assumption that their future successful selves would easily justify the investment. This approach led people to make purchasing decisions based on fantasy rather than reality, spending money they didn't have on programs they couldn't afford because they had been convinced that the programs would transform them into people who could afford such expenses. The psychological trap was particularly effective because it seemed to demonstrate exactly the kind of success thinking that Bob claimed to teach. Bob's methods for handling price objections were equally manipulative. Instead of acknowledging that his programs might be financially inappropriate for some customers, his sales staff were trained to reframe cost concerns as evidence of the poverty consciousness that was keeping people unsuccessful. This created a psychological double bind where questioning the price became proof that the customer needed the product. This is where Bob Proctor's manipulative sales psychology connects to modern neuroscience that explains why his techniques were so devastatingly effective. Bob had discovered, through decades of experimentation, how to activate theta brainwave states in his audience, the same frequency associated with heightened suggestibility and reduced critical thinking that hypnotists use to implant ideas in their subjects. During his seminars and sales presentations, Bob would use specific breathing techniques, vocal patterns, and environmental conditions to induce altered states of consciousness in his audience. In these theta states, people became much more susceptible to persuasion and much less capable of the analytical thinking that might protect them from making poor financial decisions. Modern neuroscience has now proven that theta states can be induced through specific audio frequencies, which explains why Bob's presentations were so effective at overcoming rational objections to his expensive programs. But while Bob used this knowledge to manipulate people into purchasing products they couldn't afford, the genius wave represents an ethical application of the same scientific principles. Dr. James Rivers has developed the Genius Wave as a 7-minute audio program that uses scientifically designed frequencies to activate theta states for genuine personal development rather than commercial manipulation. Unlike Bob's exploitative use of these techniques to increase sales, the Genius Wave provides authentic access to enhanced creativity, problem-solving, and mental clarity. For just $39, you can experience the same theta activation that Bob used in his manipulative sales presentations, but directed toward genuine self-improvement rather than vulnerability to expensive promises. The program comes with a 90-day money-back guarantee, representing the kind of ethical business practice that Bob's operation deliberately avoided. The link is in the description below. Bob's files reveal that he was fully aware of the manipulative nature of his sales techniques, but justified them through what he called beneficial manipulation, the belief that people needed to be psychologically coerced into making investments that would ultimately benefit them. This rationalization allowed him to maintain his self-image as a helpful teacher, while systematically exploiting the vulnerabilities of desperate customers. The most disturbing aspect of Bob's dream-selling psychology was his targeting of people who were least able to afford his programs, but most desperate for the hope they represented. His customer profiles show a consistent pattern of focusing on unemployed individuals, people facing bankruptcy, those going through divorces, and others whose emotional vulnerability made them susceptible to expensive promises of life transformation. Bob's internal communications reveal his understanding that these customers were unlikely to achieve the results promised in his programs, but he continued targeting them because they generated the highest profit margins. "Our most profitable customers," he wrote in a confidential memo, "are those who are too desperate to think clearly about whether our programs are appropriate for their situations." Thank you so much for staying with us this far in this revealing investigation of Bob Proctor's business empire. Your engagement means everything to us, and I promise, the most shocking revelations about his pricing strategies and profit margins are still ahead. What you've learned so far represents just the beginning of an exposé that reveals how an entire industry was built on the systematic exploitation of human desperation. The empire of impossible prices. By the 1990s, Bob Proctor had perfected the art of charging extraordinary amounts of money for information that was freely available elsewhere. His pricing strategies had evolved into a sophisticated system for extracting maximum revenue from customers while providing minimal additional value, creating profit margins that would have been impossible in any industry that dealt with tangible products rather than hope and aspiration. The Proctor-Gallagher Institute's internal financial documents, obtained through court proceedings after Bob's death, reveal the shocking mathematics of his business model. Programs that cost less than $5,000 to produce, including venue rental, staff salaries, and materials, were routinely sold for $50,000 to $100,000 per participant. The profit margins exceeded 95%, making Bob's operation one of the most financially efficient businesses in any industry. Bob's pricing philosophy was based on the counterintuitive discovery that higher prices actually increased demand rather than reducing it. His marketing team discovered that programs priced at $10,000 would sell out faster than identical programs priced at $1,000, because potential customers associated higher prices with superior value and exclusive access to powerful information. This pricing psychology allowed Bob to create artificial scarcity and exclusivity around information that was readily available in books costing less than $20. The same visualization techniques that Napoleon Hill had described in Think and Grow Rich could command premium prices when presented as advanced consciousness engineering methods, available only to select individuals who demonstrated their commitment through substantial financial investment. Bob's most expensive offering, the Millionaire Mind Intensive, charged participants $100,000 for a week-long program that consisted primarily of Bob reading excerpts from the same books and studies that had influenced his own development 60 years earlier. The program materials, according to internal cost analyses, represented less than $50 worth of printed content and basic supplies. The financial documents reveal that Bob's organization generated over $20 million annually through these premium programs, with individual customers sometimes spending more than $500,000 on multiple programs that provided essentially the same information repackaged in different formats. The repeat customer rate exceeded 80%, indicating that Bob had successfully created psychological dependency among his highest-paying clients. Bob's justification for these extraordinary prices was based on what he called value-based pricing, the argument that customers should pay based on the potential value of the transformation promised rather than the actual cost of providing the information. This philosophy allowed him to charge premium prices for basic concepts by claiming that the information could generate millions of dollars in value for people who applied it successfully. However, Bob's internal communications reveal a more cynical understanding of his pricing strategy. "The price is the product," he wrote in a confidential memo to his business partners in 1995. People who pay premium prices become psychologically invested in believing that they have received premium value, regardless of the actual content quality. High prices create their own justification through cognitive dissonance. The most controversial aspect of Bob's pricing strategy was his targeting of people who clearly could not afford his programs. His sales team was explicitly trained to encourage customers to borrow money, liquidate retirement savings, or mortgage their homes to pay for programs that promised to generate enough wealth to justify such extreme financial risks. Bob's files contain hundreds of testimonials from customers who described taking on significant debt to attend his programs, with many expressing gratitude for being forced to make financial commitments that demonstrated their dedication to personal transformation. The sales training materials frame these extreme financial sacrifices as evidence of the success mindset that would enable customers to achieve extraordinary results. The financial records show that Bob's organization maintained a legal department specifically dedicated to handling disputes from customers who claimed they had been misled about the potential results of expensive programs. The standard response was to cite contractual language that placed all responsibility for results on the customer while absolving the organization of any obligation to provide refunds for programs that failed to deliver promised outcomes. Perhaps the most disturbing revelation in Bob's pricing documents was the systematic tracking of customer financial profiles to optimize revenue extraction. The organization maintained detailed records of each customer's income, assets, credit capacity, and spending history to determine how much additional money could be obtained through upselling and cross-selling strategies. High-value customers were assigned dedicated success coaches, whose primary responsibility was to identify opportunities for selling additional programs rather than helping customers implement the methods they had already purchased. These coaches were compensated based on additional sales volume rather than customer satisfaction or achievement of promised results. Bob's pricing empire was built on the discovery that desperate people would pay almost any amount for hope, and that high prices actually increased rather than decreased the psychological impact of the hope being sold. This allowed him to create a business model that generated extraordinary profits, while providing minimal tangible value to customers who could often least afford the financial risks they were encouraged to take. The internal documents reveal that Bob was fully aware that most customers would never achieve the financial results that would justify the amounts they had paid for his programs. But rather than modifying his pricing or promises, he continued to expand his premium offerings while developing more sophisticated methods for convincing people to make financial commitments that often exceeded their ability to pay. The truth behind the promises. The most damaging revelations about Bob Proctor's business empire emerged from internal documents that were never intended for public consumption. Detailed statistics about customer results, confidential legal settlements, and private communications that revealed the gap between Bob's public promises and the reality experienced by the vast majority of his customers. Bob's organization maintained meticulous records of customer outcomes, not for the purpose of improving programs or helping people achieve better results, but to protect the company from legal liability and to optimize marketing strategies for maximum revenue generation. These internal statistics painted a devastatingly different picture from the success stories that dominated Bob's public presentations and promotional materials. The most shocking statistic was the actual success rate of Bob's programs, measured by customers who achieved the financial improvements that justified their program investments. According to internal tracking data spanning 20 years, Less than 3% of customers who purchased Bob's premium programs ever achieved income increases that exceeded the amount they had paid for the training. This meant that 97% of Bob's highest-paying customers, people who had invested tens of thousands of dollars in programs that promised to transform their financial circumstances, never experienced financial benefits that justified their program expenses. Most participants actually worsened their financial situations through the combination of program costs and the risky decision-making that Bob's methods often encouraged. Even more disturbing were the confidential settlement agreements that Bob's organization negotiated with customers who had suffered significant financial or personal harm as a result of following his teachings. The legal files contained over 200 cases of people who had lost homes, businesses, marriages, or health due to decisions they made while attempting to apply Bob's methods. The settlement agreements typically included substantial financial payments to victims in exchange for their agreement to never publicly discuss their negative experiences with Bob's programs. This systematic silencing of dissatisfied customers allowed Bob to maintain his public image as a successful teacher while concealing the devastating consequences that his methods had produced for hundreds of people. One particularly tragic case involved Jennifer Martinez, a single mother from Phoenix who had borrowed against her home to pay for Bob's Wealth Mastery program after losing her job during the 2008 recession. Following Bob's teachings about using visualization to attract opportunities, Martinez had declined several job offers that seemed beneath her visualized future success, eventually losing her home and custody of her children when she could no longer meet her financial obligations. I believed so completely in what Bob taught that I turned down jobs that could have saved my family, Martinez wrote in a letter that was part of her settlement agreement. He made it seem like accepting anything less than my ideal was evidence of limited thinking that would prevent me from achieving my true potential. By the time I realized that visualization couldn't pay my mortgage, it was too late to recover. Bob's response to such cases was consistent and legally sophisticated. The organization's standard position was that customers who failed to achieve promised results had not properly applied the methods taught in the programs, essentially placing all responsibility for outcomes on the customer, while absolving Bob and his company of any accountability for the promises made in their marketing materials. This victim-blaming approach was embedded in the contracts that customers signed when purchasing expensive programs. The legal language was specifically designed to prevent customers from claiming that they had been misled about potential results, while giving the organization complete protection against refund demands or damage claims. Bob's private communications reveal his awareness that the majority of his customers would never achieve the results promised in his programs, but he rationalized this reality through his belief that even unsuccessful customers were better off for having been exposed to success principles and positive thinking approaches. "Not everyone will become wealthy using our methods," Bob wrote in a confidential memo to his senior staff in 2003. "But everyone will benefit from learning to think more positively about their circumstances. The fact that most people won't implement the teachings effectively doesn't diminish the value of the teachings themselves." This rationalization allowed Bob to continue selling expensive programs while maintaining his self-image as a beneficial teacher, despite overwhelming evidence that his methods were financially devastating for the vast majority of customers who trusted his promises enough to make significant financial investments. The internal documents also revealed the sophisticated public relations strategies that Bob used to suppress negative publicity and maintain his reputation in the face of widespread customer dissatisfaction. The organization employed professional reputation management services to ensure that positive testimonials dominated search results, while negative reviews and complaints were buried or removed entirely. Bob's files contained detailed instructions for his staff about how to respond to customer complaints in ways that would minimize legal liability while maintaining the organization's public image. Dissatisfied customers were offered partial refunds in exchange for signing non-disclosure agreements, ensuring that their negative experiences would never become public knowledge. Perhaps the most damning revelation was Bob's private acknowledgement that his business model depended on a constant supply of new customers who were unaware of the high failure rates among previous participants. "Our success depends on reaching people before they have heard from our unsuccessful customers," he wrote in a strategic planning document. "We must continue expanding our marketing reach to stay ahead of negative word of mouth from disappointed participants." This admission revealed that Bob understood his business was fundamentally unsustainable if customers had access to honest information about the likely outcomes of purchasing his programs. His entire empire was built on maintaining information asymmetry between the organization and potential customers, ensuring that people made purchasing decisions based on carefully curated success stories rather than representative outcome data. Conclusion: Bob Proctor's story reveals one of the most troubling aspects of the personal development industry: the systematic transformation of human hope into commercial profit through techniques that prioritize revenue generation over genuine customer benefit. His 60-year career demonstrates how charismatic teachers can build enormous wealth by selling dreams to desperate people, regardless of whether those dreams have any realistic chance of becoming reality. The evidence from Bob's internal documents makes it clear that he was fully aware that the vast majority of his customers would never achieve the results promised in his expensive programs. Yet he continued to expand his operations and increase his prices, developing increasingly sophisticated methods for extracting money from people who could often least afford the financial risks they were encouraged to take. Bob's business model was based on the discovery that desperate people will pay premium prices for hope, and that high prices actually increase rather than decrease the psychological impact of the hope being sold. This allowed him to create a business that generated extraordinary profits while providing minimal tangible value to the customers who funded his wealth. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Bob's empire was the systematic suppression of information about customer outcomes and the legal strategies designed to prevent dissatisfied customers from sharing their experiences publicly. This information control allowed Bob to maintain his reputation as a successful teacher while concealing the financial and personal devastation that his methods had caused for thousands of people. The question that Bob Proctor's legacy poses is whether there is a meaningful difference between inspiring people to achieve their potential and exploiting their desperation for commercial gain. His methods undoubtedly helped some individuals develop greater confidence and achieve better results in their lives, but they also caused significant harm to many others who trusted his promises enough to make financial sacrifices they could not afford. Bob's story serves as a cautionary tale about the personal development industry and the importance of critical thinking when evaluating expensive promises of transformation. The same techniques that can genuinely help people improve their lives can also be used to manipulate vulnerable individuals into making decisions that serve the teacher's financial interests rather than the student's genuine well-being. And we consider Bob Proctor's complex legacy. We must acknowledge both the inspiration he provided to millions of people and the systematic exploitation of human vulnerability that funded his extraordinary wealth. His life demonstrates that charisma, confidence, and compelling promises are not sufficient evidence that a teacher's methods will produce the results they claim to offer. Have you ever felt manipulated by expensive personal development promises? Do you think there's a way to distinguish between genuine teachers and sophisticated marketers in the self-help industry? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below and subscribe to our channel for more investigations into the business practices behind the personal development industry. Click the next video to discover other controversial cases from the world of success coaching and self-improvement.